What's up, everyone? Happy Monday. Welcome back to another Creative Maxon. My name is Elly, and I'm joined once again with Dustin. How's it going, Dustin?
Hi, everyone. It's going good. It's going good. Happy Monday.
Good to
I'm
be back
excited.
for
It's a
week
good day.
4. We're on week 4 already.
Yeah, it is. I actually forgot that there were 5 weeks. And yeah, I was like, we don't have anything going on today. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, so
That's
yeah,
cool.
next
I'm
week
looking
is the
forward to it.
last week. I'll
Yes,
remember that
I'm
one
also going to
next
be
week.
there for that week now. I know originally I wasn't, but I'm going to be there
Nice.
now, which should be good. Cool. Right. So, hey to everyone in the chat. Let me just do a little bit of quick housekeeping before we get into today's topic. Also, hey to Rumble Rabbit and Rosie. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're from. We always like seeing that. If you have any questions for us, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. So let me really quickly link to this page that I'm showing right now. This one here in the chat. Post out there. So this is our new, very special landing page where you can see all of the different links that we talk about during our live streams. For example, the Maxon events page, the training team YouTube channel, our merch store for a free t-shirt, and also Cineversity. What we also have is, if you scroll down, some of you who are kind of live stream regulars will know that we run a Maxon Ask the Trainer. And so we're always keen to know the questions that you will have for us. So on that link, if you click that and then scroll down, you can ask us a question, just let us know what that is, and it comes onto a spreadsheet. And then the chances are at some stage, we're going to do an Ask the Trainer and we'll be answering those questions. So really quickly, a few more of those links that can be found on that page is the Maxon events page. So here you can see all of the events that we have. And these aren't just the live streams, they are also in-person events that we have coming up. So you can see here we've got Wonder Festival, we've got SIGGRAPH, as well as all the other live streams that we have going on. And all of these live streams are actually recorded. So they're hosted on various different YouTube channels. So depending on the topic that we talk about, for example, today we're talking about Cinema 4D and Redshift. So this will be hosted on our training team channel as well as the main Maxon one. And then if it's to do with ZBrush, chances are it's also streamed on the ZBrush channel, etc. But the recordings are only hosted on the Maxon training team. So if you're watching this on the main Maxon YouTube, that's totally cool. But if you want to watch the recording of it, then you will need to come over to our Maxon training team channel to find those recordings. Also, if you want to learn anything new, so as you know, we release new products and new features almost every single month. And sometimes with those, we also release Getting Started series. And so you can check out the Cineversity website and then you can learn something new or learn about a new feature or just kind of like brush up on your knowledge. And also, as a thank you to taking part in these live streams, we do love to give away free t-shirts. So the coupon code for that is C4D Quick Treats. So when you click on this link, on the link in the chat, all you have to do is enter this passcode and then you'll get access to here. And you can get one free t-shirt. All you have to do is pay for the shipping. That will vary depending on where you live. Okay, so as I said, we're in week 4 already of this product visualization from brief to render. If you've been here since week 1, first of all, thank you. Yeah, because what we're going to be doing this week is we're going to be talking a lot about AOVs, which I know, Dustin, is a big kind of specialty of yours.
A little bit. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
I enjoy using them in post quite a bit. So we'll be doing yeah, and in this week we're gonna kind of do a more of an overview style approach to the AOVs and my favorites, why they're my favorites, what I use them for in post. And then next week we're going to actually be diving into Photoshop and doing, you know, some compositing and more showcasing some of those AOVs that we talk about today. So it'll be a good setup.
Cool. Right, let me just move us slightly out of the way. Oh, look at us here. That's nice. That's perfect. Okay, so another topic that we're going to talk a little bit about is render optimization. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that first of all, and then I'm going to hand over to Dustin and we'll talk a little bit about AOVs. But I know that's probably like the most common stuff I get to talk about is how can I speed up my renders inside of Redshift. And so I thought I'd have a little play kind of just before we came live today at how I'd potentially look at optimizing this scene. And I've actually done an entire live stream on this, on how we can get faster renders inside of Redshift. So I'm not going to go into all the technical side of things. I'm just going to give you an idea of my workflow. And if it's something that you're interested in, then I'm linking in the chat now that live stream. And so it's about an hour, but it goes into the entire sort of like optimization workflow, and then also helps you understand like the technical side of things, because it is quite a technical workflow, but it can help you save loads and loads of time. And so this is the final scene that both me and Dustin have been working on. And what I thought I'd do as a little test is I always like to do a quality test. And what I mean by that is I like to do a render where I am happy with how it looks, but I'm disregarding the time, because that then that gives me a target to work towards. And it also gives me sort of a rough like time per frame that I know I'm not happy with. And so what I did here was, let me just move this away. I did a very quick render. Well, actually, it wasn't a very quick render. I did a brute force render, which was using automatic sampling. So this is on by default. It's also a 2K render. So just to kind of show you the output there, it's a 2K render. And the only things I changed were inside of my global illumination, I set my secondary engine to brute force. So this is the brute force method. It is the most accurate because it fires a ray per pixel, and it calculates those, and it gives us a nice looking render. But the trouble is brute force can be relatively slow. I also increased my GI rays, but again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so that gave me a render that looked quite nice. We can kind of agree, like depth of field looks nice here, lighting looks nice, but it took 12 minutes, 10 seconds to render, which, as we could imagine, if this was an animation, this is going to take an awful lot of time to render if we're looking at 12 minutes per frame. And also, just to kind of clarify, I'm on a M3 Max MacBook Pro because I know hardware is also important when it comes to render performance. And so what I did was I did my optimization workflow, and I managed to get it to look like this, which, if we're honest, I think looks very, very similar. I can kind of like flick back and forth. And it rendered in 2 minutes and 17 seconds. So you can see this right here, just so you know that I'm being honest with you all. And let me just talk to you about what I did. So let's just look at the default settings. So this is starting from scratch. And all I did was, rematch the output to 2K. So these are the default settings that we have. And again, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but we have our bucket quality. And if we take a look at our advanced settings and we go into our sampling, this is where we kind of want to start. Our sampling is the most important thing here. And by default, we can see we have automatic sampling. The way that we look to optimize is we actually don't want to use automatic sampling. So this is great if you're new and if you're not too fussed about render times and you don't want to have to go into your individual samples, which is totally fine. I don't do this very often. But if you are wanting to optimize and wanting to get your faster renders, then this is absolutely what you need to be doing, looking at manual sampling. So if we disable automatic sampling, we now have access to all of our different sampling methods. And so these are all of our local and our global samples that we can now adjust. We have a minimum number of samples that are going to be fired out, and these are going to be fired out in, so samples are fired in 32 ray bundles. So we have to do like exponential values. And so our samples minimum, these are the minimum number of samples that we want to fire out. And a good recommended minimum for things like standard materials is 16. So this will cover most cases for our minimum samples. When it comes to max samples, we then have to think about the things that are going to be affected. And so these are only looking at anti-aliasing, motion blur, and depth of field. These aren't our local samples, which are things like global illumination, reflection, refraction. So all this relates to is anti-aliasing, motion blur, and depth of field. So depending on what you have in your scene will depend on how high you need to go. Again, a recommended sort of max is 512, but because I have really heavy depth of field in this scene, I'm probably going to want to go to 1024, maybe even 2048. But what I would normally do is, as I'm making these changes, I would be doing test renders and just seeing what does and doesn't work. This threshold is now basically going to define how aggressively the algorithm goes from minimum to maximum samples per pixel. And so if you find that we're not getting a clear enough render, it's not hitting those max quick enough, this is where we lower this threshold. And so again, this is where you need to be doing some test renders and finding out which threshold works for you.
Yeah, so a good way that I like to test this is being very aggressive with the with region renders. Instead of, you know, taking your entire scene into play, you kind of just pick an area that you know is going to be noisy or grainy visually, and you kind of just snap a small region to it and start to test your parameters there first. But yeah, I've done it the long way, and I do wait, you know, for the whole scene to kind of start to calculate, and then you can be waiting a long time. You might as well have just rendered it to begin with.
No, I like that. Yeah, I do all my sort of what I think might work, and then I do like a test. Yeah. And then but no, I like the bucket render region as well. That's a good shout.
And if you're rendering stills, I do have just a side note, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
If you're rendering stills, don't forget you can denoise in post. A lot of times, like, and it's not so bad now because I've been through the gauntlet with this stuff. But there are plenty of times where I've been on industry projects, and early on, I'm talking like the first couple of years, it's like you sit there and you do things, it looks all great, and you wait for it to render and wait for it to render, and it looks perfect, but your render times are also insanely long. When sometimes you can get away with rendering at much lower, you know, quality of a render and then just denoising it in post, and it looks just as good as what you waited, you know, 30 hours for. So yeah, I've been slapped on the wrist a few times as a as a newer artist for that stuff. So yeah, just throwing it out there.
No, that's good to know. The joy of post, eh?
Oh yeah.
Cool. So the next bit that I would then look at is looking at our local samples, which are these overrides down here. So these are the things where you now, as an artist or a designer, need to know what's going on in your scene to then adjust and apply those samples. So for this scene in particular, we can see we're going to have an element of reflection as well as an element of things like subsurface scattering. And so this is where I need to come in. I need to enable this override, and I need to define my samples, again, based on how heavy or soft it is in my scene. So again, 512 is always a really good recommended amount. But then if you find that you're still getting elements of like noise and grain and issues in those areas, so it's again looking at like so for example, subsurface scattering, if I have this at 1024, but I'm still seeing noise and grain in my subsurface, that's where I adjust those samples. If I'm then seeing grain around everything, that is actually inside my final local sample, which are my brute force rays. So these are our GI samples. So, you know, sometimes in the background, you see loads of like noise and grain. That is where you might need to adjust your brute force rays, or again, even sort of like just lower that threshold just to ensure the max samples are being hit in the areas that need it. So overrides are your local samples that you want to like play with. And this is the order in which I do all these things. My next step is going into my GI. So as we said, we originally did a brute force render, which is great because it's the most accurate. It is sort of like therefore the best looking subjectively, but it's slower. And so what we can do is we can actually get away with using IPC, so Irradiance point cloud, as our secondary engine. And what this does is basically it's going to fire a ray every 16, every pixel in a sort of like 16, is it like a centimeter radius or sort of like that? So basically it doesn't fire on every pixel, it fires every sort of like 16, and then it interpolates between them. But again, we can reduce this and we can increase this. So that's why it's faster, because it's not having to calculate every single one. It's kind of just going to blend between the two. If you find you need brute force rays in the smaller, tighter areas, you can actually increase this retrace threshold. And that's also a good trick if you're working with animation. So normally brute force for animation is great, but what we can do is we can use IPC and we can just adjust this value and increase this to force brute force rays in the tighter areas and prevent any of that flickering. And this will make the biggest difference to your sort of render speeds. And then finally, another quick thing is our trace steps. And so these are the individual bounces per ray. So these are the different rays we have: reflection, refraction, etc. And these are defaults, which are great. So the defaults work really well. But what I see a lot of people not do is, if you don't have these things in your scene, you could actually just pull them down. And so don't leave them to the default, because that will still use up some performance and some hardware. And so if you actually remove the trace steps that you don't need, you could then compensate for the ones that you do need, or you could still leave them at defaults, again, speeding up that render time. And then finally, a little sort of like extra thing is the bucket size. And so the sort of misconception is the bigger the bucket size, the better. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes if you have a lot of small, intricate details, then a smaller bucket size can often work. And also this is GPU dependent. So you'll see I have this little message down here. So the end of this message is, we recommend increasing the bucket size. So you can do that. But again, sort of be aware of what is going on in your scene. And so just to really quickly go show you the optimized final result, because again, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I have done that whole stream that is linked in the chat. But this was sort of the final that I did. And I'll show you the before and after as well. So these were the minimax samples. I then just overrode, is that the technical term? The reflection and the subsurface scattering. I then just reduced my globals and then, as I said, set that to Irradiance point cloud. And I left that to the default, actually. I didn't even change any of this. And then my bucket size, I just changed to 256. And that was what gave me a, where's my picture view gone? I've hidden that somewhere. Picture viewer, here we go. So that was how we ended up going from I ended up going from a 12-minute, 10-second render to a 2-minute 17. And so you can see just down here, there's a little bit of a difference. And if anything, I actually think it looks better. I think we get less noise in the faster render, having optimized our samples and our settings.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's, you know, the small details like that, when it, you know, comes to post work and the time that goes into it, unless you absolutely need like a 1-to-1 match and it has to be perfect, a lot of times the little bits of contrast, it's almost better to do that when you're finishing and grading, you know, an image versus trying to bake everything in on the first go. I've found from experience, a lot of times you get into post and it's like you can have those values crunched, you know, quite harshly on the lighting side. And so, yeah, I think it looks better.
Cool. That's good to know. Thanks. Because I'm never sure, but no, I looked at it and I thought, yeah, I feel like it looks a little bit better. But for the sake of saving myself 10 minutes, like you said, in post, a lot of this stuff could then be dealt with. So yeah, I'm more than happy to save 10 minutes per frame and fix some small things if I need to. Cool. Yeah. So like I said, if you're keen on learning more about optimization, I have linked a live stream in the chat that I did that goes into that whole process over in a lot more detail over the space of an hour. And I do the process live, and we're sort of looking at rendering an interior scene. So yeah, feel free to kind of dive into that if you want to. Okay, so Dustin, I don't know if you've seen, there's actually been a question in the chat about talking a little more about denoising in post. I don't know if that's something that you might be doing next week anyway.
We may. I don't know if we'll actually need it next week unless we intentionally place it. Unless we put it there on purpose, we'll see. Denoising in post. I mean, realistically, I mean, most of the software at this point comes with some type of denoising algorithms. Photoshop is generally not the greatest right off the bat, so I'll use something like Gigapixel is really good. So Topaz, Labs, they have the Gigapixel, or no, Gigapixel. It's the denoise. I keep saying Gigapixel, but it's actually the denoise plugin that they have, or software that allows you to go in and denoise, your renders. There's a bunch of different settings. And I know that there's some in After Effects. They also have, Topaz has a video AI that does some really nice denoising as well. And so that's usually where I'll go first, when it comes to having to denoise like a very grainy render. But I'm also a guy that likes to place noise in my renders anyway. So I don't always run from noise. It's one of the things that I teach artists all the time is, not to run from the imperfections, just make them intentional. And so if you're rendering something and all of the detail is obliterated, then I would definitely, either render it out at better settings or try a denoiser to get it to work. But in most cases, I think little bits are fine. We could talk next week a little bit about fireflies, which I haven't really hit too much, honestly, since I've been using Redshift. It's been far more when I'm using something like Octane or a different render engine inside of Cinema 4D that I'll occasionally get fireflies and have to deal with those in Photoshop. But we can maybe address that a little bit next week and just talk about how to adjust that if we need. But yeah, I definitely plugins and software for denoising are, they're kind of a dime a dozen out there. So just finding one that works for you is definitely the best route.
Cool. There was actually one quick thing I did want to say. It's something that we were talking about just off stream. And it was some particular passes, in particular light passes.
Oh, yeah.
It recommends using, and so bear in mind, recommendations are not sort of a must do. They are just what is advised. And that is, some light passes do advise a brute force method. And the reason for that is when you then composite them together in whatever software you choose to use, that render won't match necessarily absolute like for like with the beauty pass that you were originally working with. And sort of me and Dustin were chatting about this, and he sort of said that, like, I mean, I can't speak for you here, but you could probably say it doesn't necessarily matter as much if you're then willing to make those sort of updates and changes. If it's saving you the render time, it could then be worth it to do.
Yeah, so there's always a technical way and a creative way to do things, and I more often than not lean towards the creative side, because I'm a post guy anyway. I love post production. So whether it's in Photoshop or Nuke, whatever software, I enjoy messing with the renders and grading and doing all of these things, stacking effects and so on. And so for me, I would say probably at least 75% of the time, like my renders are a good base. I still treat it like photography where I like to get it, looking good and exposures and things like that are right, on the rendering side. But I also keep in the back of my mind that, hey, in order to finish this, I'm going to add grain. I'm going to add chromatic aberration, maybe some light leaks and lens effects or, stuff like that in post. I'm going to be grading it. And so I, when it comes time to say, working with certain passes that look perfect, as they do in their renders, say some of the lighting passes, for example, with this in this scenario, it's like as long as I have that light isolated and it looks 90% close to how it did in the render, I'm fine with that because I'm going to tweak the lighting and adjustments anyway. And so I don't get too carried away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always talk a little bit and just sort of like just bear that in mind if you are sort of not doing brute force. But as Dustin said, the creative approach is always a nice one. Cool. So if there's no other questions on sort of like optimization, I know I sort of ran through it quite quickly, but it's a little bit of a workflow that, is a bit technical, but can save us a lot of time. So I guess because we're already like the time is just flying. I feel like it always does, Dustin. Did you want to take over and talk about some AOVs?
Yeah. So let's do that. We'll kind of add them in a little bit more real time here as we're talking about some of them.
Sounds good.
So the first one that I wanted to talk about is really kind of a node setup along with the AOV. And that's the store color to AOV. So I use this a lot when I have specific parts like logos and so on products that I'm using for client work that need to be adjusted, whether it's the color, whether, regardless of what it is, it just needs to have its own mask in the render layers. And the store color to AOV node is great for that. So you'll see that I have it set up here. And this is the node that we're talking about in question. So we can kind of rebuild this setup here a little bit. I more wanted to show, if I bring this up, we can make it a little bit larger on the screen. I kind of wanted to show how this is set up because this really confused me when I started using it and not understanding exactly the way that it needed to go. So the way this is going to work is your store color to AOV node. If I can, there we go. Let's bring the material node up. The store color to AOV node is actually going right in between. If I take this off, it's going right in between your material node and the surface output for the output node. And so we place this right in between here. And then whatever alpha channels that we've created or, masks, whatever it may be, are going to be plugged into the AOV slots. So for instance, in this one here, we can kind of solo this in the viewport. There we go in the render view here. And we'll see that I've adjusted the jellies bag here so that we can see the direct output of just the words that are on this bag. And so for any reason, if we wanted to adjust those or the way that they look in post, now we can render this out with a mask that's going to have those cleared out. And the way that we got to that, make that a little bit smaller. There we go. The way that we got to that was taking our diffuse texture and then plugging in a color splitter. And that color splitter is going into a scalar ramp. And so the scalar ramp, we can maybe just go this way. We can see here that the color splitter is going to allow us to take our red, green, and blue channels and even our alpha channel if we had one in there. And we can kind of split that out into the store color to AOV. And so the way that I like to work with this first is by taking a look at whatever color is going to work the best for that specific texture. Sometimes you'll have wear and tear on the edges of metal and things like that. And you want to specifically adjust that in post and maybe make it stand out more or less, whatever works for you. Going through these different channels here in the render view are going to help you visualize that. And so what I did is I took the red channel and then piped that into the scalar ramp. And then inside of the scalar ramp, I'm able to go in and start adjusting these values to crunch this down however I need. And so what I did here is just like the curves tool in Photoshop, is I just went in and starting adjusting this far enough that I'm able to get, you know, kind of an interesting result with the different colors that are on that bag. And so once I get that down and isolated quite a ways, I can then pump the scalar ramp through the output here into the AOV slot of the store color to AOV node, which in itself is pretty interesting because you can add up to 2 different inputs here. And I believe you can do more. Maybe not. And so once we get in here, you're basically going to see that we have our scalar ramp plugged into AOV 0. And then we're able to go in and create a new custom AOV, which is what I did to call this bag red. So this is the red channel of the bag that I have adjusted for that mask. And then if we wanted to, we'll find a different one and maybe do this, bring this down a little bit. And yeah, let's grab this guy. So we'll look at this node here and we'll see that we have the pretty cool design here for the roughness that's being piped in. And so what we may want to do is adjust this in post and have a little bit more control over that specifically. And so what we'll do there is take a look at a place, you know, down the pipeline here where it works out pretty well. And I think initially in this one, the initial base texture is actually good for that because it's already black and white. And so what we can do is go to the store color to AOV. We can press Control on the input 1. And that's going to let that populate right inside of our store color to AOV node here. And then we can pipe over our texture directly into that input. Oh, there we go. See, so as we start to add more, we have more down here that we can pipe in. So remember that. Usually I only have maybe 1 or 2 that I have to worry about. So in this case here, we have our packaging design and we can now click our drop down here. We can add a new custom AOV, and that custom AOV we'll just kind of name that gibberish for now. And that will give us one that we can now use inside of our render view. Maybe. Oh, there we go. If we go back to RGB. Okay, maybe not. Did I maybe name that too crazy?
Did it show up before or was that a different one?
No, that was the other one. So I have the bag red that's in here. Let's see where my settings are at.
Does it have to be like bucket or something, like some of them do?
It should not. Let's try it. See, the render region helps a lot. Let's go to buckets. No, it should work. As is without buckets. And I'm not in any other channels. Oh, I see why. Hold on. It's because I have it soloed. See? Let's go in and let it think a minute. So,
I can't tell you how many times I do that, by the way.
On day, and then, yeah, I was gonna say on day 52 of rookie mistakes.
I think my favorite was I started a live stream and I forgot I'd set like material override to a gray to just render out a grayscale version of the render before the live stream. And I got into the live and I was like, why is this gray? And like, everyone was like, oh, it could be this, could be that. And it was driving me crazy. And I was like, oh, yeah.
Oh, you know why it was? It's because I had it all set up first. I should have just set it up all fresh and, you know, and went there with it. So anyway, we can turn off the view here. And so now we can see, you know, once it's not soloed in our node editor, that we have our bag now is giving us this mask on its own separate AOV. So note to self, make sure you don't have your node soloed because it's not going to work the way that you expect it to. But this is really useful when it comes to, you know, decals, logos, kind of any small details. I like to use this a lot when I'm creating very complex materials, like I was saying earlier, with kind of grunge and wear and tear in certain areas. You can just throw those masks in here. It's really good for dirt and wanting to use like dirt passes in post with the curvature nodes and all of that, because you're able to go in and really fine tune, you know, the way that the AOV is going to look once you get to post. And so if you don't have anything soloed, it shows up nicely in your render view and you can kind of continue along that process. So in moving along, now my brain's like, wait a minute, we have to go back. So we're going to talk about some of my favorite passes, and we will just bring up our AOV manager so we can head to our render settings, click into Redshift. We'll be on the advanced tab in the mode here, head over to AOV and then show AOV manager. And what we'll do is, let's see, what do I have? We can add our BumpNormals. So I usually like to have my diffuse lighting. So this is going to be just the lighting and diffuse color in your render without any reflections, any of that. And then we have the shadows, which is really nice for post. Our specular lighting for any of the highlights and reflections that you have. And then there are others that I like to use. So we can pull a depth in here and we will grab a, let's see, we'll do a normals, but I think we'll do BumpNormals for this one. And so the cool part about the BumpNormals is that it's going to take the information from your materials and actually use that in this pass, versus the normals pass is going to be more kind of geometry based and maybe not show all of the crevices and different bump information from your materials. So those are really nice to have. And then we could talk about ambient occlusion, but I like to do that through custom AOVs. So we'll just throw a custom AOV in here and we can name this AOC for custom. All right. So let's head into our probably BumpNormals first, because this is going to be one of my favorites to use. And the reason for that is because it really allows you to adjust and relight certain parts of your image based on this information. So once we get to Photoshop, we'll see in this pass that obviously here we have the red, green, and blue channels. And in Photoshop, we can work really well with each of those channels. And then we'll also talk about how we can adjust and kind of rotate some of the lights based on this pass. And I do have an entire series. There's a whole month that I go into post-production in Photoshop and talk about all of this stuff in a bit more detail. So it may be worth checking out. Hopefully Dr. Sassy can link that, you know, kind of post live stream here and kind of link everybody to that whole series of videos. So in this one, the cool part.
Well, while you're talking about that, whereabouts is that? Because I can find it and link it in the chat.
Oh yeah.
Is it on your website or?
No, this is on. It was a demystifying series. So
oh, cool. Yeah, let me find it then while you're.
Yeah.
While you're doing this, I can link it.
Yeah, it's the one with the Raptor.
The Raptor. Yeah.
Yep, the Raptor and the Nintendo Switch. So
yes, that's cool. Yeah, I'll find that now. We'll link it in the chat.
Sweet. Put it there. All right. So the cool part about these is with the normals, you have your RGB channels. And so what we can do is split those out in Photoshop, and we can start to adjust things here, like our rim lights. We can do our kind of a top light. So in the automotive world, in compositing, we use normals a lot to really increase the depth of, you know, the side shots of vehicles. And so we would light them a little bit more from the top, and then kind of reverse those normals, and then, you know, kind of darken them towards the bottom. It creates a really nice gradient of light. And yeah, Rumble Rabbit. Yeah, they saved your life. Yeah, like they like the normals pass. Like once you get to using it, it really helps. I'd say almost every shot in some way can benefit from using a normals pass to kind of. I don't always like to say relight, but really modify like the pop in your scene. Um, and so, yeah, so the red, green, and blue channels. So when you're using Redshift is a little bit different with the way that it's going to read the RGB channels here, specifically that blue channel. And I think I can show kind of how that works and how I adjust for this. So there's not a ton of blue information, and we'll see that here on shots that are a little bit more straight on. You may not see almost any blue at all. And for me, that's usually okay, because I'll work in Photoshop and kind of manipulate, you know, I call it hue shifting. We'll kind of manipulate some of that direction of these different channels. But if you want to adjust that, usually what I do is I unlock my camera. Man, I'm about, you know what? Let me save this a minute. Let's save this first. Because I feel like sometimes you do these things and it's like crash, and it's just what it is. But that's only because we're live streaming. Most of the time this works out just fine. So I'm going to delete the protection tag that we have there, and I'll select everything in our scene, and I can go to our rotation tool, and then I'm just going to rotate this 180 degrees. All right, 160 is close enough. Let's see if we can keep going. My mouse is way on the other side of on my other monitor right now, so it's kind of funny. All right, there we go. So if we head back to RGB, there we go. This is going to be a little bit closer to what we might be used to seeing with the normals pass. And so you have them split out a bit differently. You have kind of equal parts, red and blue. And so I like to make those adjustments if I really need to have that blue channel. We can go back to how it was. You know, and right now, like our camera is kind of off kilter. Our whole scene is a little bit off center. And so when we're rotating everything like that, that's where you see like the green channel kind of move around. I kind of know based on the product that I'm working with most of the time right away when I'm setting up cameras, if I need that to really work kind of in that blue channel for my normals. And so I immediately know just to kind of work with my scene, I guess, backwards, if you will, to get the information. Let's see, if you want to render a pass with just an object and its shadow, you should use an AOV or just render out the object with PNG transparency and then composite in After Effects. Oh, that's totally a workflow thing. For me, I usually like to use PNGs when able. So if I can get away with it, I'll just use a PNG and then composite the shadow in post, whether that's in Photoshop or After Effects. I really like it. It can get tricky at times, and so we do talk in the other series that Elly had posted in here. We talk a bit about shadows and rendering out, you know, certain things with the shadows inside of Redshift and out. And I really would prefer to have the control to have the alpha channels and PuzzleMattes and so on and so forth, like all set up right inside of my compositing software and just do the shadows in post. So kind of a personal preference. So this is the BumpNormals. It's a really good pass. The diffuse lighting is really nice because you can actually take, even on a beauty render, you can use this diffuse lighting pass and you can kind of overlay this on top of everything and remove reflections off of certain objects, um, rather than having to go through a whole multi-layer approach. And so I like to have this there and just mask that off as needed. Now in the shadows is going to be a little bit different than you might expect if you're coming from an engine like Octane. So it's just literally kind of flipped. In this case, what I like to use these shadow passes for most of the time are actually just alpha channels in my compositing software. And so I use, in this case, what would be these whiter bright areas is just going to be like a layer mask for me in Photoshop. And then I'll adjust with, kind of an exposure node and drop the exposure and some of the contrast in those shadow areas and work with it there, because then it just allows me to work a little bit more, with the color. Yeah, it's very similar to V-Ray. I haven't worked it with V-Ray in years, but I do remember it being a little bit different as well. And so each render engine that you work with is going to have kind of their own slight way of doing things. But this one for me is usually going to be some type of an alpha channel or a layer mask, Luma matte if you're using After Effects. And we're waiting for it to think here a second. Okay. So do we have any other questions?
I was looking through. I wasn't sure if you saw the one from George asking, are these similar to clown layers exported in Keyshot? I don't know if you're familiar with.
Okay, so no. I'm assuming we're talking about the normals. So a clown pass, I don't even know that we can do a technical clown pass in Redshift outside of CryptoMatte. CryptoMatte would be the closest thing, I believe, to a clown pass. And we can talk about that here a moment as well. How are we doing on timing? Oh, we got 12 minutes. We're good. Look at that. All right. So we'll talk about, we're going to talk about PuzzleMattes and we'll talk about CryptoMatte here in a second. Because CryptoMatte will be a lot closer to what you're looking for in the clown pass. So we'll go to Specular. Whoa, there we go. So Specular is going to be the lighting that's in your scene. I need to stop pressing that key. There we go. So the Specular is going to be really good for the reflections. Again, if you're using just a beauty render and kind of compositing with that, I still like to have these two passes, the diffuse lighting, and I like to have a specular pass, because this is amazing for things, even in this case where you have the bag and you want to really tweak and manipulate the way that's working in your scene with the reflections. But also things like metal work really good with just enhancing a little bit of the specularity. And this is definitely the easiest way to do that, aside of, kind of local sharpening in Photoshop and so on. Okay, so we're going to move along here. I do see Rumble Rabbits. Did you bake the shaders to reduce the render time and cache the geo?
Is this related to the optimization?
I think that's optimization.
Yeah, so no, actually, all of that, the kind of like the 12 minutes to 2 minutes was the exact same scene. It was just tweaking the render settings. But yeah, caching your simulations and things like that will also help speed things up. But ours are already sort of baked down because the cloner was made editable. So we haven't really got any other sort of simulations or caching that needs to be done. But yes, that is a good thing. But no, that wasn't done. It was just render settings.
Nice. All right. So the last two passes I think that we can talk about here. We didn't talk about our ambient occlusion. So let's do that first before we get into the masking, or kind of the info passes for those two. All right. So what we'll see is that I have the custom AOV here that is set up for the ambient occlusion. I like to set it up this way to have a little bit more control over what I'm using. And so what we're going to do is actually head into our material. Which one is it? Holy cow, it's been forever. Utilities, there we go. So we'll head up to create utilities, and then we can add an AO material here. And then what we'll do is we'll just take this material and drop it inside of the default material for our custom AOV. And then we can head to that pass here inside of our render view. Put our region render back on. There we go. I feel like there's a slight lag. See, I probably should have cached my, I could freeze my geometry, but maybe we won't need it.
Is this when it's soloed again?
Is it soloed? It should not be soloed again. No, it shouldn't be. No, it should work just fine. What is it saying here? I can't even read it. Oh, it's saying that one of them's failed. Okay, so I guess maybe we just skip that one custom AOV then. So I can't really read it. I can open it up here. Let's see what's. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's happening. I'll have to throw that in. So for now, we'll just delete that, and we'll move along to our PuzzleMattes. So Elly, make a quick note so after stream I can kind of throw that into into my questions for probably Thanasis or Yotis. What are the two of them?
That can be like a next week. We could start with that and see and dive into sort of the custom AOV.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so the last two that we're going to talk about here, and I promise they'll be pretty quick. So it's going to be the PuzzleMatte, and what this is going to allow us to do is take certain materials in our scene, and we can assign different IDs to them. So for the red ID, we'll do 2, we'll do 3 for green, and 4 for blue. And so we can take certain materials that we have in our scene. So we can take the gummy material, we can head to the output node, and then at the bottom of our attributes for the output node, we'll see that we have a material ID. And so for this one, we'll say we want our gummies to be 2, so those will be red. Maybe I can just leave this over on our edge here so we can see that a little bit easier. And so with that, should be good there. And maybe they're not. Oh, this is odd. Okay, so maybe fully accept it. There we go. We'll just assign a crazy name to it and see if this works.
Not showing up.
And it's not showing up. Okay, good stuff. Let's
yeah, the PuzzleMatte's not showing up at all, is it, in the passes? I wonder, I mean, could it be something as simple as like getting rid of the render view and reopening just to kind of trigger a...
Yeah, I'll restart the render view.
Yeah. I feel like these are the the joys that come with live streaming sometimes.
100%.
Yeah, there's always like, you could never prepare for the things that can happen when you happen to be live streaming on the same machine that you're rendering on.
And just to make sure, okay, see, so I'm not soloed on anything else. Yeah, that's odd. Okay, let's delete that. Bring another one in. Wow.
Is it giving you a scroll option to scroll down for when you drop down the passes?
No, it's not.
It's not coming up at all.
So we have all the passes that we just went through. Weird. Okay, let's.
Why don't you try and save and reopen the file?
So we'll try this and see if that works. Where's our render view? There we go.
Menu.
Oh yeah, there we go. All right, other side. There we go.
Hopefully this should work.
Actually, we won't even do that.
Still not there. Nick Sharma saying, at least it's not on the show floor of a convention. I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, it could be worse. It totally could be worse.
Like silver lining.
Yeah, and I mean, like, really, Nick, though, like, anybody that watches this knows that it's not the first time and probably won't be the last time that it's happened to us on stream. So you know, when we do this stuff, it's
you just gotta roll with it sometimes. These things happen.
Yeah, this is weird to have two of them though. Just working with AOVs. Yeah.
It's strange that it's not showing at all, as opposed to not working. It's not visible.
Yeah, that's so odd.
Do you know what?
I mean, and it shouldn't change. And it shouldn't change if I go. I mean, because usually you do have to use buckets for it.
Yeah, but you can't even click it.
What is happening? Look at.
Oh no! Oh no!
But that's it. So this is what we're supposed to be getting. Like, I don't know what
you're clicking on PuzzleMatte.
But it's in here now. So when we go in,
well,
maybe it just had to. Maybe it took 5 minutes to kind of populate and think on its own. Anyways, I have no idea. But PuzzleMatte is showing in the render view now, and so I'm happy. So that side's working. So with the PuzzleMatte, we can see that we have a red channel here, which is nice. Again, when we go to post and we change this to the red channel, it's going to be its own solid alpha channel that we can use to pull from. And now we can work with the other numbers that we have here in our setup. So we can take our bag and we'll head into our output node, scroll down to the bottom, and we can make our bag, we'll say MaterialID 3. And so that will be updated. So we'll have a green bag. And then if we had a backdrop or anything like that or other pieces in this shot, I think next week, Elly and I might talk about adding some kind of sugar crystals and things onto the gummies. And for those, that would be a good one to maybe go in and add as a, as a fourth parameter or as the blue channel here for number 4. And so we would see all of those differences so that we could go into post and we could make adjustments here and grab each part of our scene individually. So with PuzzleMattes, it's kind of nice because we can go and add multiple of them. And so we can really take a lot of control over everything that we have in the scene, which is a little bit different than CryptoMatte, depending on your compositing software. Photoshop by itself does not handle CryptoMattes very well, if at all. I don't think that it actually works with them at all when you're talking just CryptoMattes. But if you use the plugin EXRIO, if you're a PC guy or girl, that's the one that you want to use, and you can kind of split out all of the different alpha channels in one foul swoop rather than having to go through them. So for the CryptoMatte, we'll add that in here because this is going to be another one that's going to require us to use buckets. What we can do here is similar to the PuzzleMatte. We can choose between the object name, the material name, your Redshift object ID, or the user attribute. So most often I'm working with the object and material names alone. And so in this one, we can head over to CryptoMatte in our render view, and we'll see this here being a little bit more like what we're used to seeing inside of a clown pass, where you're getting different colors. We can go by material name here as well, and it should actually be very similar. There we go. And now this is going to be a little bit different, different colors. And as we start to add more elements to this scene, you can start to get a whole lot of different colors. Now, in this case, we have our materials, I believe is, yep, because it's just the one gummy and then everything is instanced. And so with that, this is why we're getting just the one color for all of our gummies, which actually isn't too bad. I actually prefer it this way versus going through the whole process of trying to composite and work with a ton of different crypto layers, like one for each individual gummy. I've been there. It's not too fun. So yeah, so those are the main ID passes that I work with, being the PuzzleMatte or multiple PuzzleMattes. Usually I like to have probably 2 or 3 of them. Sometimes I actually use like just one mat will be like just a standard red channel for the entire like client product. And then I use that as the alpha to kind of extract that for certain things that I need. And then I'll have other PuzzleMattes for just the pieces in the scene so that I can kind of name those and I don't get lost as to what is what in the compositing side. And then again, the CryptoMatte with EXRIO is really nice because it allows you to kind of extract everything. And whether you're using After Effects or you're using something like Fusion or Nuke, the CryptoMatte's going to be kind of an invaluable pass because you're able to go in and select each channel specifically as you need it. And that'll help you out as well. So what's up with the Z pass? Did you use it from the cam or did you just inside the pass? Okay, so that's one we haven't talked about. That one is great. And I like it. Actually, I like it a lot less for adding a depth of field in post, as opposed to the way that I normally use it, which is to add atmosphere and kind of atmospheric perspective and fog and haze, or a depth mask to composite in different overlays inside of my final shots. So with the Z depth pass, if we take a look at that here a moment, and we'll go to depth 0, we'll get out of our render region. Okay, so because I work in Photoshop most often, when you're using a Z-depth pass like this, if you're used to using them already, when you get to something like Nuke, I believe Fusion probably works close to the same way. You're going to get just a white pass, and you're going to have all the values in between there that you can work with. Because I use Photoshop, what I actually have to do is change my depth mode from Z to Z normalized. And that's going to give us what we normally see as a Z depth pass. And there are ways in Photoshop to work with a standard, Z pass with different corrections that you can use in Photoshop to make adjustments, but it's definitely not nearly as intuitive as just, having it set up this way first for more of that Photoshop side. And so the way that I like to use this in Photoshop, I don't know that we'll be doing it much next week because this isn't really the type of like cinematic shot that I would I might use them on. But for environments, this is great because you can have an entire depth pass, obviously, but you can start to factor in different layers of solid colors. So like an off-white or gray if you want to add some fog or kind of smoky environments. And then you can just start to work with the levels inside of the Z depth to pull that more towards the camera or further from the camera. And what's also nice about this is that you can render out then a Z normalized inverted, which is going to just reverse the way that this is read. And now everything in the front is going to be white and everything black is going to be pushed towards the back, which is also nice, just to have the two passes to work in and around each other. So you can also just invert this in Photoshop or in post, whatever software you're using. But I generally find that just having the two passes kind of cleanly rendered can be a huge benefit because they don't really take much time when you're talking the grand scheme of things. So I guess as Elly said with kind of the brute force rendering, for certain passes, and some of the best use cases for those, when you're rendering, you have to use buckets to visualize certain things in your render view, like the Z-Depth pass, the CryptoMatte pass. It's going to be your PuzzleMattes, kind of any of those like specific ID passes. You're going to want to use, the buckets to see them rather than just using the progressive and think that your stuff's not working properly. So hopefully that makes sense. Do we have any questions? I know we went kind of fast after the hiccup that we had with the one. So I wasn't sure if there was any catch-up questions on the back end.
Not at the moment. I mean, they may come in now you've asked, but I think, yeah, you've been answering them as you go, really, haven't you?
Cool.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Awesome. So yeah, that's pretty much all we have for this week in talking about the render layers and different AOVs. Next week is going to be quite a fun ride where we finish off. I guess we would finish off the shot. See, this will be kind of fun. So I think next week what will have to happen is we have to do the sugar crystals on the gummies.
Yeah.
And then we have to render out. Thankfully, you have a 2-minute render time now. And so we'll do the 2-minute render time and then see if you can scoot that PSD or EXR over, and we'll just composite it live in Photoshop as it sits.
I think that sounds cool. It would be really cool to see your process live and how you.
Yeah, we'll see. It could be. It could be amazing. It could also be very. I'm just standing here not knowing what I'm doing anymore. But either way. Yeah, so it'll be fun.
So we'll never know, and it'll come out looking amazing, I'm sure.
Yeah, so it's pretty exciting to kind of finish up the month. I wish we actually had like another 2 weeks because there's a whole lot of stuff we can go into that we'll have to save for a whole nother one.
Yeah, so I think it'll be cool as well to see like not a before and after, but slight mini recap from where we first came from or first started in week 1, looking at just like the animation side of things to get that final shot to then the final composited nice looking render, just as like a reminder of the things that we've gone over 4 weeks or 5 weeks. So I think that should be a fun thing to do at the end maybe as well.
Yeah, I agree. Looking forward to it.
Me too. Cool. Yeah. So I guess we can wrap this up. But as always, sort of thank you to everyone who's along live with us. Like it's great to have you all here and sort of asking questions in the chat and just kind of engaging. Like it's great to see it. It's great to be part of this like nice community. And also thanks to you, Dustin, for taking the lead on this in this series. I'm looking forward to being there. I'm glad I'm now there next week, so I can feel like
me too. So I am thinking that we do need to find a way to incorporate a soundboard when we have when we have these certain things, little hiccups that happen, we
So
can
you
just
know you can. I mean, this is probably something I shouldn't be doing live on stream, but we could have background music. Shall I try it and just see what it looks like now? Everyone can just enjoy this music. I hope it's not loud.
Yep.
Not very entertaining, but hey.
So we need to find a good piece a good few pieces of audio that we can sort of play.
We can add audio, so it can be like when something doesn't work.
I like it
in the background.
That might be just as good, if not better.
See, this is why you stay to the end of the live stream for relevant information like that.
Oh, good times.
Okay, cool. I guess we should probably wrap this up, and everyone can get back to enjoying their days and their weeks. And yeah, thanks again, Dustin, and we'll see you all next Monday.
Sounds good. See you then, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.